What happened in the congressional hearing room yesterday will be remembered as one of the most devastating political moments of the year. Former Senate candidate Herschel Walker thought he could mock actor Jonathan Roumie's military knowledge with a laugh that would silence him forever. What he didn't expect was the letter from Roumie's veteran father that would completely destroy Walker's reputation in front of the entire nation. The moment Walker let out that dismissive chuckle, thinking he had cornered the acclaimed actor, everything changed. Roumie didn't just fight back. He unleashed a family secret that left the former Senate candidate speechless and the entire room in complete shock. The confrontation had been building for months, with military families across America watching as their loved ones' careers were held hostage by political maneuvering. Promotion ceremonies were canceled, retirement plans disrupted, and military children faced uncertainty about their futures, all while politicians played games with their parents' careers. What made this moment even more explosive was that Walker had no idea what was coming. His intelligence about Roumie's background was completely wrong. His staff had focused on Roumie's acting career and public persona, but had completely missed the most important fact about his life. He was raised by a decorated combat veteran who had taught him everything about military service and sacrifice. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of these explosive political moments that are reshaping American politics. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this plays out. This wasn't just another political argument. This was the moment when years of disrespect met decades of military service, and the results were absolutely devastating for Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker walked into that hearing room with the confidence of someone who thought he owned the place. At 61 years old, the former NFL football star and Georgia Senate candidate has made a name for himself by taking on anyone who challenges conservative military policies. Known for his tough talk about supporting the troops, Walker has spent his time in the political spotlight, positioning himself as the ultimate defender of military values. Walker's rise to political prominence had been built on his legendary football career and his ability to connect with voters who appreciated his straight-talking style. His supporters saw him as someone who understood discipline and leadership from his decades on the field, guiding himself and his teammates through the pressures of professional sports. They believed this experience translated directly to understanding military culture and values. But there's something about Walker that his supporters often overlook. Despite all his military rhetoric, Walker himself never served in the armed forces. His entire understanding of military life comes from the sidelines of sports and politics. As a former athlete, he dealt with various figures, and now as a political figure, he makes statements about people whose experiences he's never lived. Walker's confidence that morning came from months of successfully defending his controversial stance. He had weathered criticism from military families, veteran organizations, and even some political allies. In his mind, he was fighting for principles that mattered more than individual careers or personal convenience. He genuinely believed his football background gave him special insight into military discipline and sacrifice. On the other side of this confrontation sat actor Jonathan Roumie, the 49-year-old performer known for his powerful portrayals and deep commitment to his causes. While not an elected official, Roumie has quickly become one of the most respected public voices in discussions around faith and social justice. With a public profile built on thoughtful engagement, Roumie has never backed down from a fight, especially when it comes to defending military families and veterans' rights. Roumie's public advocacy had been built on his reputation as someone who did his homework and came prepared for battle. His thoughtful approach to his roles in public discourse had taught him to build arguments methodically, gathering evidence, and waiting for the right moment to present it with maximum impact. He had spent weeks preparing for this confrontation, knowing that Walker's dismissive attitude toward military families demanded a response. What most people in that room didn't know was that Roumie's passion for military issues runs deeper than public activism. His father, Master Sergeant David Roumie, served 3 tours of duty in Vietnam and spent 22 years in the Air Force before retiring with full honors. The lessons he taught his son about service, sacrifice, and standing up for what's right shaped everything about who he became. Growing up as a military child had given Roumie perspectives that few public figures could claim. He understood the reality of military life, the constant moves, the deployments, the uncertainty, and the unique challenges facing military families. This wasn't theoretical knowledge gained from scripts or advocacy briefings. It was lived experience passed down from father to son. The hearing was supposed to be a routine discussion about military spending and veteran benefits, but tensions had been building for weeks between Walker and several political commentators and public figures over his controversial public stance that supported holding up military promotions for months over abortion policies. Roumie had been one of his most vocal critics, arguing that these actions were hurting military families and weakening national security. What made this confrontation even more significant was the timing. Military families across the nation were dealing with unprecedented challenges. Base housing shortages had reached crisis levels in several states, with families living in substandard conditions while waiting for renovations that couldn't proceed without proper leadership in place. Military spouses were facing employment difficulties as frequent moves and deployment schedules made career stability nearly impossible. The promotion holds had created a cascading effect throughout the entire military structure. Senior officers who should have been advancing to positions where they could address these systemic issues were stuck in limbo. Junior officers were questioning whether military careers offered the stability and advancement opportunities they needed to support their families. The human cost of political maneuvering was becoming impossible to ignore. Military mental health resources were already stretched thin, and the uncertainty created by the promotion delays was adding additional stress to service members and their families. Counselors on military bases reported increased anxiety among personnel worried about their career prospects and financial security. The very people dedicated to protecting America's security were finding their own futures uncertain due to political games. The stakes couldn't have been higher. With military families across the country watching, this confrontation would determine who really stood with America's service members and who was just playing politics with their lives. The hearing room itself had become a symbol of this larger struggle, with gallery seats filled by military spouses, veterans, and family members who had traveled from across the region to witness this debate about their futures. The tension in the hearing room had been building all morning. Walker had already gotten into heated exchanges with 3 other public figures and commentators, each time using his folksy charm to deflect criticism while maintaining his hardline stance on military policies. The former athlete seemed to be enjoying himself, treating the serious hearing like another game day where he could outmaneuver his opponents. Earlier in the morning, Walker had dismissed concerns from a fellow panelist about delayed medical benefits for military spouses, joking that military wives are tougher than most folks think. When another speaker questioned the impact on military children's education, Walker had waved off the concern with a comment about how moving around builds character. Each dismissive response had increased the tension in the room. Behind the scenes, Roumie's team had been working frantically all week to prepare for this moment. They had compiled dozens of stories from military families affected by the political rhetoric supporting such holds, documented cases where career officers were considering leaving the service due to uncertainty, and gathered statistics showing the real-world impact of the political standoff. But none of that preparation would matter as much as the letter his father had written the night before. When Jonathan Roumie's turn came to address Herschel Walker, he started with a measured tone, asking about the practical impact of the military promotion delays and the rhetoric supporting them on service members and their families. His questions were precise, analytical in their structure, and clearly came from someone who had done his homework. "Mr. Walker," Roumie began, his voice steady but firm, "can you explain to the military families watching at home why their loved ones are being denied promotions because of this political agenda?" The question cut straight to the heart of the issue, bypassing political niceties and demanding concrete answers about real-world consequences. Military families had been asking this same question for months through letters, phone calls, and social media posts that had largely been ignored by those in political power. Behind Roumie's measured tone was months of preparation and research. His team had compiled hundreds of personal stories from military families affected by the promotion delays. There was the Air Force colonel whose retirement ceremony had to be postponed because his replacement couldn't be promoted. The Navy commander whose family had to delay buying a house because they weren't sure if his expected promotion and transfer would go through. The Army captain whose wife had turned down a job opportunity because they didn't know if they'd be staying at their current base. These weren't abstract policy debates. They were real disruptions to real families who had already sacrificed so much for their country. Roumie had studied every case file, memorized the statistics, and understood the human cost in ways that his dedication to truth and his public speaking experience had prepared him to articulate clearly and powerfully. Walker leaned back in his chair, that familiar smirk spreading across his face. "Well, Mr. Roumie," he drawled, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not sure someone who's spent his life in front of cameras would understand the complex decisions we have to make here in the political arena." The room went quiet. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Roumie's expression didn't change, but those who knew him could see the flash of something dangerous in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker," he replied, his voice still controlled. "But are you suggesting that I don't understand military issues?" Walker's grin widened. He was clearly enjoying this moment, thinking he had found his weak spot. "I'm just saying, Mr. Roumie, that playing professional football, including with plenty of former military, gives you a certain perspective on what real service looks like. Some folks talk about supporting the troops, but they've never actually been in the trenches with them." A few political allies in the room chuckled quietly. Walker was playing to his base, using his football background to establish credibility while subtly undermining Roumie's authority to speak on military matters. But Roumie wasn't backing down. "Mr. Walker, with all due respect, playing professional football is not the same as serving in combat, and supporting actions that hurt military families isn't supporting the troops. It's using them as political pawns." The temperature in the room rose noticeably. Walker's face flushed slightly, his good old boy demeanor starting to crack. "Now hold on there, Mr. Roumie. I've spent my whole career around warriors, real warriors. Maybe if you spent less time on movie sets and more time with actual service members, you'd understand what we're dealing with here." That's when it happened. Walker let out a dismissive laugh, not a chuckle, but a full mocking laugh that echoed through the chamber. It was the kind of laugh that said, "This little actor thinks he can lecture me about military matters," the laugh that would haunt him for months to come. "Something funny, Mr. Walker?" Roumie's voice had changed. The measured analytical tone was gone, replaced by something sharper, more personal. Walker was still smiling, completely unaware that he had just made the biggest mistake of his political career. "I'm just thinking about how some people like to talk tough about military policy when they wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world where these decisions matter." The room was electric now. Other public figures and commentators were sitting forward in their chairs, sensing that something big was about to happen. Walker's allies looked confused, not sure if their colleague was winning or walking into a trap. Roumie stood up slowly, reaching into his folder. "Mr. Walker, since you find my military knowledge so amusing, I'd like to share something with you and everyone watching at home." He pulled out a sealed envelope, his hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "This morning I received a letter from someone who actually knows what real military service looks like. Someone who spent 22 years defending this country while you were playing football games." The weight of the moment was palpable. Staff members in the room stopped their note-taking and looked up, sensing that something historic was about to unfold. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys, ready to capture what would become one of the most significant exchanges in recent political history. In the gallery, military family members leaned forward in their seats. Gold Star mothers clutched photographs of their fallen sons and daughters, understanding that this moment represented more than just a political confrontation. It was about respect for their sacrifice in the service of their loved one. Active duty spouses squeezed each other's hands, knowing that their experiences were about to be validated by someone who truly understood their struggles. The atmosphere in the room had completely transformed. What started as routine political theater had evolved into something much more profound and personal. Even the most cynical political observers present recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment when authentic moral authority was about to confront political posturing. Camera operators adjusted their equipment, instinctively understanding that they needed to capture every nuance of what was about to happen. The usual background chatter and shuffling of papers had ceased entirely, replaced by an expectant silence that seemed to stretch through the entire building. Walker's smile faltered for the first time. He had no idea what was coming, but something in Roumie's tone made him realize this wasn't going according to his plan. "This letter is from my father, Master Sergeant David Roumie, United States Air Force, retired. A man who served 3 tours in Vietnam, who earned a Bronze Star, and who taught me everything I know about what it really means to serve your country." The introduction alone carried tremendous impact. The mention of 3 Vietnam tours and a Bronze Star immediately established Master Sergeant Roumie's credentials beyond any possible challenge. These weren't political talking points or campaign rhetoric. They were the hard-earned distinctions of a career soldier who had proven his dedication to country through actual combat service. Several veterans in the gallery nodded in recognition and respect. They understood the significance of multiple Vietnam deployments, the weight of a Bronze Star citation, and the dedication required for a 22-year military career. They also understood that Master Sergeant Roumie had earned the right to speak about military service in ways that civilian political figures, regardless of their other accomplishments, simply had not. The room was dead silent now. Several people had their phones out recording what was clearly about to be a historic moment. Walker sat frozen, his casual confidence completely evaporated. Roumie opened the envelope with deliberate care, his movements controlled and precise. The letter was handwritten on simple stationery, but everyone in the room understood they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Mr. Walker," he began, his voice now carrying the weight of decades of military service. "My father wanted me to read this to you personally since you seem to think I don't understand military matters." He unfolded the letter and began to read. "To Mr. Herschel Walker, I am Master Sergeant David Roumie, retired United States Air Force, writing this letter through my son because your recent actions and comments have deeply insulted every service member and military family in this country." The impact was immediate. Walker's face went pale and several of his political allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't just political theater. This was personal, and it was devastating. Roumie continued reading, his father's words carrying across the chamber with the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak truth to power. "Mr. Walker, you laughed at my son's knowledge of military affairs. Let me tell you what he knows that you clearly don't. He knows that when you support holding up military promotions, you're not making a political point. You're destroying careers that men and women have spent decades building. He knows that when military families can't get the promotions they've earned, their children suffer, their spouses struggle, and their service to this country becomes a burden instead of an honor." The room was absolutely silent, except for Roumie's clear, strong voice reading his father's words. Even the cameras seemed to focus more intently, understanding that they were capturing something historic. "My son knows these things, Mr. Walker, because I taught him. I taught him by coming home from 3 tours in Vietnam with stories about the brothers I lost and the friends I buried. I taught him by explaining why we serve, not for politicians who play games with our lives, but for the idea that America is worth fighting for." Walker tried to interrupt, raising his hand slightly, but Roumie kept reading, his father's voice speaking through him with unstoppable momentum. "Mr. Walker, you played professional football for many years, and I respect that. But playing a game is not the same as leading young men into combat. It's not the same as holding a dying soldier in your arms. It's not the same as writing letters to mothers who will never see their sons come home." The emotional impact was devastating. Several people in the gallery had tears in their eyes, and even some of the hardened political veterans in the room looked deeply moved. Walker sat motionless, completely unable to respond to the raw power of these words. "You want to know what real military knowledge looks like, Mr. Walker? It looks like understanding that every promotion delay you support represents a family's future. Every delay you cause ripples through communities across this country. Every political game you play with military policy affects real people who have already sacrificed more than you can imagine." Roumie's voice grew stronger as he read the letter's climax. "My son doesn't just understand military issues because he studied them or because he's met with veterans. He understands them because he grew up in a military family. He understands them because he watched his mother worry every day for 22 years whether her husband would come home safe. He understands them because he lived with the reality of military life while you were playing on a football field." The silence in the room was deafening. Walker looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. His earlier confidence and mocking laughter seemed like they had happened in another lifetime. But Master Sergeant David Roumie wasn't finished. "Mr. Walker, you laughed at my son's military knowledge. That laugh was an insult not just to him, but to every military family in America. It was an insult to every veteran who has fought for your right to speak in this forum. And it was an insult to every service member currently putting their life on the line while you play politics with their careers." Roumie paused, looking directly at Walker before reading the final paragraph. "My son has more understanding of military sacrifice in his little finger than you have developed in your entire political career. He doesn't just talk about supporting the troops. He fights for policies that actually help them. He doesn't just use military families as political props. He works to solve their real problems. So the next time you want to laugh at someone's military knowledge, Mr. Walker, Remember that some of us earned our understanding through blood, sweat, and sacrifice, not through playing football and making political speeches. The letter was signed simply, Master Sergeant David Roumie, United States Air Force, retired, proud father of Jonathan Roumie. The final line carried particular weight, not just as a signature, but as a declaration of pride from a veteran father in his son's dedication to service. It was a reminder that military service takes many forms and that those raised in military families carry forward the values of service and dedication in their own unique ways. The silence that followed was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of profound silence that comes when truth has been spoken with such power that no response is possible. In that moment, the usual calculations of political advantage and partisan positioning seemed meaningless. The letter had stripped away the veneer of political theater and exposed something much more fundamental: the difference between those who had earned the right to speak about military sacrifice through personal experience and those who simply assumed that right through public prominence. The emotional impact rippled through the room in waves. Military family members in the gallery sat with tears in their eyes, finally hearing their experiences and struggles articulated with the authority and dignity they deserve. Some clutched the hands of those sitting beside them, overwhelmed by the validation that Master Sergeant Roumie's words provided. Staff members from various political camps sat transfixed, their usual note-taking and strategic thinking momentarily suspended by the raw authenticity of the moment. Even the most hardened political veterans present recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary. A moment when genuine moral authority cut through political noise with devastating clarity. The press gallery, usually buzzing with whispered commentary and analysis, had fallen completely silent. Veteran political reporters, accustomed to parsing every word for partisan advantage or strategic implication, found themselves simply listening to the voice of a father defending his son, and through him, all military families. Walker sat completely still, his face flushed red, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The man who had been so confident and dismissive just minutes earlier looked like he had been physically struck. His mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. Other panelists and political figures sat in stunned silence, many of them clearly moved by the raw emotional power of Master Sergeant Roumie's words. The usual political calculations and partisan considerations seemed meaningless in the face of such authentic moral authority. Roumie carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but carried absolute conviction. Mr. Walker, my father wanted me to tell you that your laughter today was heard by military families across this country. They heard you dismiss the son of a Vietnam veteran. They heard you mock someone who has spent his public life fighting for their rights and benefits. And they will remember. He sat down, the letter still in his hands, and looked directly at Walker. Do you have anything to say to my father, Mr. Walker? Any response to a man who actually served this country while you were playing football? Walker finally managed to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. I have great respect for your father's service, Mr. Roumie. I never meant to... You never meant to what, Mr. Walker? Roumie's voice cut through his stammering. You never meant to laugh. You never meant to dismiss military families. You never meant to use your public platform to play politics with people's lives. The hearing room remained silent, waiting for Walker's response. But he had nothing left to say. The man who had entered the room with such confidence looked defeated, his political theater completely dismantled by the authentic voice of military service. The immediate aftermath of Roumie's devastating letter reading was unlike anything political observers had seen in recent memory. As the hearing officially ended and participants began filing out, the room buzzed with whispered conversations about what they had just witnessed. Even seasoned political veterans, people who had seen decades of political theater, admitted they had never seen anything quite like Master Sergeant Roumie's letter. Walker left the hearing room without speaking to reporters. His usual post-hearing media availability mysteriously canceled. Staff members were seen hurrying after him, clearly trying to figure out how to respond to what had just happened. Walker, who had entered the room, ready to mock and dismiss his opponents, had been completely silenced by the words of a Vietnam veteran. Within minutes of the hearing's conclusion, video clips of Roumie reading his father's letter began spreading across social media with unprecedented speed. The hashtag #MasterSergeant Roumie letter started trending almost immediately, with military families and veterans sharing their own stories of sacrifice and service. The most widely shared clip showed the exact moment when Walker's confident smile disappeared, replaced by the stunned realization that he had badly miscalculated. His dismissive laugh, which had seemed so clever in the moment, now looked cruel and ignorant when contrasted with Master Sergeant Roumie's powerful words about real military service. Military family support groups across the country began posting their reactions to the confrontation. Gold Star mothers shared the video with comments about how Master Sergeant Roumie's letter captured their own experiences with politicians who talked about supporting the troops but failed to understand their real needs. Active duty military families posted about how the rhetoric supporting promotion holds had actually affected their lives, giving concrete examples of the damage these political games had caused. Conservative military veterans found themselves in an uncomfortable position. Many had supported Walker's stance on various issues, but Master Sergeant Roumie's letter forced them to confront the difference between political posturing and actual service. Several prominent veteran organizations issued statements calling for more respectful dialogue about military issues and fewer political games with service members' careers. The mainstream media coverage was extensive and largely focused on the authentic emotion of the moment. Political commentators struggled to analyze the confrontation using their usual partisan frameworks because Master Sergeant Roumie's letter transcended typical political categories. This wasn't about partisan divide, it was about authentic military service versus political theater. Major newspapers ran extensive profiles of Master Sergeant David Roumie, detailing his 3 tours in Vietnam, his Bronze Star citation, and his 22 years of distinguished service. The contrast between his record and Walker's civilian background became impossible to ignore, especially given Walker's habit of positioning himself as a military expert. Television news programs played the letter reading extensively, often without commentary, letting Master Sergeant Roumie's words speak for themselves. The emotional impact was so powerful that even political opponents found it difficult to criticize Roumie's response to Walker's dismissive laughter. International media picked up the story as well, with foreign correspondents noting how the confrontation highlighted broader tensions in American politics about who has the moral authority to speak about military issues. The image of Walker's shocked silence after being confronted with authentic military service became a symbol of political prominence being challenged by real-world experience. Social media analysis showed that the video of Roumie reading his father's letter reached millions of views within the first 24 hours, with engagement rates far higher than typical political content. The comment sections were filled with military families sharing their own stories and thanking both Jonathan and Master Sergeant Roumie for giving voice to their experiences. Military spouse groups organized online campaigns to share the letter, with many noting that Master Sergeant Roumie's words about the impact of political games on military families perfectly captured their own struggles with politicians who claimed to support the troops while making their lives more difficult. The political implications extended far beyond the immediate confrontation. Walker, who had built much of his political brand around military issues, despite never serving himself, found his credibility severely damaged. Military families who had previously supported him began questioning whether he truly understood their needs or was simply using them for political advantage. Political strategists recognized that Roumie had achieved something rare in modern politics, a moment of authentic moral clarity that transcended partisan divisions. His father's letter provided a template for how to challenge political opponents, not through personal attacks or partisan talking points, but through genuine moral authority earned through service and sacrifice. Walker's political allies, meanwhile, struggled to find an effective response. How do you attack a Vietnam veteran's letter to his son? How do you defend laughing at the military knowledge of someone raised in a military family? The usual political counterpunches seemed inadequate in the face of such authentic moral authority. Polling data released in the weeks following the confrontation showed significant shifts in public opinion about military issues and political authenticity. Voters expressed increased skepticism about politicians who talked tough about military matters without having served themselves, and increased respect for political figures who had genuine connections to military service. Military recruitment centers reported increased interest from young people who said they were inspired by Master Sergeant Roumie's example of service and his son's willingness to fight for military families. The letter had reminded many Americans of the values that military service represents and the importance of having authentic voices advocating for service members. The long-term political consequences continued to unfold over the following months. Walker found himself increasingly isolated on military issues, with even some political allies distancing themselves from his more controversial positions. His vocal support for holds on military promotions, which had seemed like clever political maneuvering before the confrontation, now looked petty and harmful in light of Master Sergeant Roumie's letter. Roumie, meanwhile, saw his influence on military and veterans issues grow significantly. Military family advocacy groups began reaching out to him more frequently, seeing him as someone who truly understood their concerns. His father's letter had established him as not just a public advocate, but as someone with genuine moral authority to speak about military issues. The confrontation also sparked broader conversations about the nature of public expertise and moral authority in American democracy. Master Sergeant Roumie's letter had demonstrated that real-world experience and authentic service carried more weight than political positioning and rhetorical skills. Veterans advocacy groups seized on the moment to launch broader initiatives, highlighting the difference between politicians who talked about military issues and those who truly understood them. The letter became a rallying cry for more authentic representation of military voices in public discourse. Several retired military officers penned op-eds in major publications, drawing parallels between Master Sergeant Roumie's service and the current generation of political figures making statements about military policy. These pieces highlighted a growing concern in military communities about the disconnect between political rhetoric and lived military experience. The confrontation inspired a new generation of military family members to consider public service themselves. Young people from military backgrounds reported feeling motivated by Roumie's example to pursue careers in public policy and advocacy, and even acting roles that highlighted such issues. Seeing how authentic military experience could cut through political noise, educational institutions began using the confrontation as a case study in effective public communication, noting how authentic personal experience could be more powerful than traditional political tactics. The letter reading became a template for how to respond to political attacks with moral authority rather than partisan counterattacks. As time passed, the confrontation between Walker and Roumie came to symbolize larger tensions in American politics between authentic service and political posturing, between genuine understanding and surface-level expertise, between moral authority and public influence. The ripple effects extended into military communities worldwide. American service members stationed at overseas bases shared the video with their families, many reporting that Master Sergeant Roumie's letter helped them articulate their own frustrations with politicians who claimed to support the military while making their lives more difficult. Base commanders noted increased morale as service members felt their experiences were finally being recognized and validated at the highest levels of public discourse. Military academies incorporated the confrontation into their leadership curricula, using it as an example of how authentic moral authority can overcome political maneuvering. Cadets and midshipmen studied the exchange as a lesson in standing up for principles and the power of earned credibility versus assumed authority. The letter became required reading in several military ethics courses. International military partners and allies took notice as well. Foreign military attaches reported that their own service members were sharing the video, seeing it as an example of American military values being properly defended. The confrontation reinforced respect for the U.S. military culture among international partners who had sometimes questioned American political commitment to service members. The moment also sparked important conversations within military families about civic engagement and political participation. Many military spouses who had previously avoided political involvement began attending town halls and contacting their representatives. Inspired by how effectively Roumie had channeled his family's military experience into public advocacy, veteran service organizations experienced a surge in membership and volunteerism following the confrontation. The letter had reminded many former service members of their continued obligation to advocate for current military families and active duty personnel. Local veteran groups organized letter-writing campaigns to elected officials using Master Sergeant Roumie's example as a template for authentic military voices in public discourse. The lesson was clear. In an era of political theater and manufactured outrage, authentic voices speaking from genuine experience still held the power to cut through the noise and speak directly to the American people's sense of right and wrong. Master Sergeant Roumie's letter had reminded the country that some things, service, sacrifice, and moral courage, transcended political gamesmanship. For Herschel Walker, the laughter that seemed so clever in the moment became a defining mistake that highlighted the difference between talking about military service and actually understanding it. For Jonathan Roumie, his father's letter became a source of moral authority that elevated his voice on military issues far beyond his public prominence. And for Master Sergeant David Roumie, his words defending his son became a reminder to the entire country about what real military service looks like and why it deserves respect rather than political manipulation. The story of that day in the hearing room became more than just another political confrontation. It became a testament to the power of authentic service and the importance of moral courage in American democracy. It showed that sometimes the most powerful political weapons aren't clever tactics or rhetorical skills, but simple truth spoken by those who have earned the right to speak it. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of these incredible political moments that are shaping our democracy. These confrontations between authentic service and political theater are defining our times, and you'll want to see every one of them as they happen. The battle for the soul of American politics is being fought in moments like these. And Master Sergeant Roumie's letter proves that truth and service still matter more than clever political games.